If we can make a start. Good evening and welcome to this meeting of Schools Forum. My name is Andrew O'Neill and I'm the chair of Schools Forum. The event is being held in Kensington Town Hall and is being streamed live on YouTube, where members of the public and the media are welcome to watch the meeting remotely and listen to the discussions taking place. Let's move into the main part of the meeting. Item A1, apologies for absence. I've received apologies so far from Mariella Ardron, Stephen Keogh, Alison Mould, Kathleen Williams, Craig Hanlon, David Benson, however, Lawrence Weeks is here in David's place. Any more, Luke? Okay. Item A2, declarations of interest. Do any members of the forum have any interest to disclose? No? Okay, fantastic, thank you. Item A3, minutes of the meeting held on the 13th of January have been circulated. Any comments from members on the minutes?
Only just to say I was present, and I'm not on the.
Okay, we'll have that. Thank you, Catherine. Okay, is it your wish for them to be signed off as a correct record?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well done, Luke. I think that's the first time we've not had any amendments. Peter, you sure? Because usually we
Yes,
have
I
something.
did. Before you came in, I did congratulate Luke on the clarity of his minutes.
Very good. Okay, sorry. Okay, fantastic. We move on now to item A4, alternative provision, behaviour and outreach proposal, and Ian, over to you.
Thank you. Yes, unfortunately our commissioning colleagues weren't able to attend, so I'm just going to highlight some of the key points here in the paper. Just to give you a bit of context, we do come to Schools Forum annually with our proposals around the amount of high needs block funding that will be spent as part of our, what was an SLA and now a contract on our alternative division, including behaviour outreach. These proposals have been to the High Needs Review Group a couple of weeks ago, where we had a really helpful discussion about proposals and talked about some of the related elements. Some of you will be aware that there are charges directly for schools, Warmington Academies Trust, as well as the majority of the funding that's commissioned centrally through the borough. So the aim here, I think, is set out for you what the ask is in terms of proposed spend for the placements at Latimer, Alternative Provision Academy, and also the proposed spend on behaviour outreach. So just looking onto the second page, you will see at the in 2.1, you will see how the total spend on places has reduced since 21-22, and that links to a discussion we had here at Forum a couple of years ago, and with schools at HES meetings around the charges that Ormiston makes directly to schools and what is funded essentially through high needs, and a lot of that, as you know, linked to our discussions around the overspend at the time. Clearly statutory provision, those statutory places are funded and commissioned centrally, whereas for managed moves, what was agreed was that there would be a reduced amount spent centrally by the high needs block, and conversely an increased amount spent by secondary schools in terms of the places at Goldbourne Education Centre. So, the proposal in 2.4 is that we spend £414,000 a year for 2 years, part of a slightly longer term contract now, on place provision. Then, just before I move to behaviour outreach, it is worth flagging that, as we'll all be aware, there is an increased number of children with SEN at Latimer, and we also have, again through Julie's work, a commissioned number of SEN places, and in terms of feedback from parents and the work we're doing with Ormiston, the proposal is to develop more of a specialist provision on the ground floor at Latimer, and as you'll see in 2.6, and we've spoken previously around spend on independent sector places, we're really hopeful as that provision opens and is developed. I know Julie's been doing a lot of work with Bassett and Avril and the team. You can see the comparator in 2.6 with what the top would be for a local place, a child with an education health and care plan, primary needs, social, emotional, mental health, compared to what we would commission when independent borough school. So that's our proposal around places. And in terms of behaviour outreach, essentially it is a proposal to maintain the current levels of funding. And so over the page you'll see 3.5, that primary outreach, which is a core offer, any primary school can access, where the outreach team come out and provide support in individual schools or do whole school support. That remains at £100,000 a year, and then £144,000 would continue to go towards the costs of running the Goldbourne Education Centre, temporary places, managed intervention places for secondary students, and that helps reduce the overall cost for schools of buying individual places. So apologies the recommendations weren't in the paper, but Luke, you've handily produced them, haven't you, on a separate sheet, so really happy to take any questions, or you can talk about the recommendations.
Yeah, sorry. We're hoping that we will start to see a move, sorry, I'm talking about sound,
Yes.
into Latimer, which will obviously save us a huge amount of money. Given that Latimer alternative provision is associated with exclusion,
Yes.
and parents are always fighting against exclusions because they say we don't want our children to end up there, even though we know it's a good provision, can turn children around. Do you not think there'll be an antipathy amongst parents with children with SEND against this, and so therefore do we have to do a big branding thing, or
Yeah.
Sorry.
As ever, spot on. I mean, let's turn to
Question.
Julie, who's been absolutely dealing with those issues with us, to think how we move forward.
So we've written a specification for what the Latimer SEM provision will be, involves the outreach teachers, education psychology, but really importantly we went along to talk to Parent Carer Forum, Full of Life, to get their views, and so they understood in their role kind of supporting families what we were trying to achieve, and they were very much on board. But also went to meet with Wasim and his colleagues last week to talk about actually probably the best voices will be the voices of some of the young people who have left, who've got fantastic results. And so what we're going to do is do some sort of videos and clips of young people themselves talking about where they were and what they'd achieved. And inviting their families to be part of the journey as well. So we build up a narrative that's not just spin and branding, but it's actually the lived experience of the young people who benefit from it. And we really are investing in making it an attractive place that when young people go to see the SEM bit of it, it's somewhere that they can feel themselves being successful learners.
Okay, and then one pushback on that. As we know from a million other places, children with special educational needs are more likely to fall foul, be preyed upon, shall we say, by certain people. So
They're more
if they're
vulnerable, yeah.
be more vulnerable. So are we putting them in a place where essentially making them potentially more
So two discrete bits of provision there. So we're talking about it being on the ground floor, a completely separate entrance. We are.
But then that's part of my thing about, do we really make sure everybody understands it?
We have to help parents understand that message as well, but certainly the specification that we've created and the capital investment is making them very clearly separate provisions.
And it is, for people who know that's very different for essential. Oh, sorry, David.
Will it have a different name?
We have talked about a different name for it, yes.
I think that'd be very
Yeah.
sensible.
I think you're right. I mean, I think, making a short film would be great. It's discreet, it's nice. With a great soundtrack. And,
Are you offering?
yeah, absolutely. I'm not going to film it, but I'm very happy to be involved in visiting and looking from an aesthetic point of view, for sure. No problem. Is there any money for that, for making a short film?
Well, there's money for the capital investment from RBKC, Hymie's Capital, but because it's part of Ormiston now, we're actually seeing a little bit of investment from Ormiston as well.
I think that falls into the remit now of Ormiston Academy. So we're not going to be careful that we aren't telling them what to do if they wish to win a contract.
But I think Amanda's point is right. It is about perception, really, and it's about us being responsible for ensuring that that provision is perceived as being something quite remarkable.
I think pulling it back to forum point though, my point is whether the assumption is a good one, that we're going to reduce places. it's kind of where it all came out of.
And obviously we've got two things going on. So we're talking here particularly about the alternative provision places, because it's worth noting that the majority of children in an alternative provision place, majority of them have SEN, either identified as SEN sports or have an EHCP in an AP place. But we're also talking about filling, hopefully through this discrete provision, the SEN places as well. But it will be quite set. People who know the building provides lots of challenges and opportunities. It is listed. So when the borough was a landlord, we did spend over, £2.1 million, I think, on getting the building in as good a state as it could be before Ormiston took on the full academy lease. As Judy said, we can identify some ring-fenced high needs capital to hopefully enable this discrete provision to really get off the ground and be successful.
Okay, thanks Ian. Any other questions? Jackie?
Well, the first one is, are you using a bit of headroom within the Highgate block to do this, the extra spend, or is it already built into your plans now? That's the first bit, and the other one is actually more operational, and it's just a question really, and it's like, it's actually, if they've got different entrances, will they have completely different arrival and departure times? That's not for this forum, it's just to make sure it works, that's all.
Yeah.
So in terms of the financial budget position, so when we did the deficit recovery plan, actually, we had left the figures the same. We, in error really, we should have put the figures down, but we'd left the funding the same. No idea this was going to happen. So there is budget provision within the plans, yes.
Thanks, Anita. Peter?
I was going to raise the priority point as to whether we were spending more on this. You know, was it a priority compared to other high needs block expenditure, given that we were trying to reduce it? I mean, is it absolutely necessary?
And I think just going back to 2.1, in terms of the overall spend on places, you'll see that's reduced quite a lot compared to 21-22. We were spending glasses back on £493,500 a year, 21-22, and then in the current year it's gone down to 414,000. We propose that remains the same, but you know the cost of the provision actually gone up over that period of time.
Sure.
So what's happened is that basically schools are paying more directly, because Ormiston still needs to have the funding to deliver education to the children, but our spend here centrally has gone down.
Fine. And finally, just a point of clarification in 3.6, what is GEC?
The Goldbourne Education Centre, where children at secondary level go for temporary placements, maybe 6-12 weeks, and they go back to their home school.
Thank you.
A slightly different point. But when you transfer the student to Goldbourne on a managed move, previously used to be scaled depending on when you transfer it during the year. Now they charge you the same amount regardless of when you transfer. Doesn't seem very fair to me. It seems contrary to other principles of kind of education finance as well. What's wrong with doing anything about that?
That's I don't think that's the forum. That was agreed with heads, that head teachers
I
meeting.
just thought I'd raise it anyway.
Yeah.
I agree it's a simple point.
The head teachers, secondary heads agreed that with Ormiston when we renegotiated that.
And I think
That part of the contract, and it was just because of the sliding scale meant that at certain points they were losing money in effect.
and the other ones I should have mentioned, Julie may come to it later, given the Send an AP from the paper, and very recently the Send an AP improvement plan, very much around trying to give longer term certainty around funding for alternative provision. If we are able to make this decision tonight, exactly as you say, Lawrence, that conversation then continues with both heads groups, with Ormiston directly, about charges from schools and how that fits. So you're clear, what those costs might be, have those discussions at heads meetings if we agree this recommendation tonight.
Okay.
Do any of these places get allocated to children out of borough? No.
Well, very, very rarely.
Well, so if you've got a permanently excluded resident who's educated out of the borough, they would then come back to Latimer, because they'd be last term's responsibilities. So you might have a KNC resident in a Brent school, and if they were permanently excluded, fortunately those things are very rare, they would then come to their home alternative provision setting.
Thank you.
KNC is not a great exporter, is it? It's more of an importer. Okay, all right, should we move on? So the recommendations are in points 2.4 and 3.5, and I think put them on separate paper there. So 2.5, the revised proposal not to cease the top-up funding of non-statutory placements from 23-24, and instead to maintain funding at the level agreed for 2022-23. Are we in agreement? Yeah, and 3.5. It's proposed that we seek to vary the behaviour outreach contract for up to 2 years to bring in line with the alternative provision contract for the amounts that are provided below. Are we in agreement on that as well? Okay, fantastic. Thanks everybody. We move on to paper A5, which is the monitoring of the DSG. Anita.
Yeah, there's not an awful lot to say on this paper. Our DSG has increased since we last reported. We've got another 368,000. That's money for Chelsea Community Hospital School for their temporary move to the Bayswater Centre. It's actually 2 years' worth they've given us in one go. So that's a straight into the DSG, straight out to Chelsea Community Hospital School. And then when we look at the overall DSG forecast position in table 2, overall that's improved by about 200,000, so moving in the right way. That's mainly because we've done some further work on the independent placements and have been able to close off some that we hadn't stopped for the new academic year that are no longer in independent placements. So good news that means that overall we're now forecasting an underspend of 829,000 in year, which does reduce the overall deficit. We're still left with a sizable deficit of nearly 6.8 billion, but that's a lot better than the 9.5 that we had in our plan. So some of the actions are taking effect earlier than we thought. So in the right direction.
Okay, great. Any questions on the DSG? No? Okay, thanks everyone. So just ask the forum to note in 411 the 22-23 DSG allocation of 81.8 million and also the underspend of 829,000, reducing the deficit to 6.8 million. Okay, we move on to A6. Recommendations from the high needs block reference group that met since the last meeting at the end of January.
And many colleagues in this room, thank you for your participation. It was a very well attended group. I think quite positive discussions about the proposal and the different areas of work here. So as Anita said, the high needs block is now forecasting to underspend. And there's an improvement in the cumulative DSG position. So those points are focused on in paragraph 3. So cutting to the chase here in terms of the discussion and the recommendations from the high needs block review group, we did look at the impact of when banding values change and how that can cause hardship for particular schools. At paragraph 4.3, there is a recommendation now that schools that meet the particular criteria that's set out in 4.4 would be protected from that change until the start of the following term. So that's the first proposal. The second one relates to targeted funding, para 5.2. So this is the funding when you exceed 50% of your notional funding in meeting the first 6,000, and you currently get a refund of 3,000, and the concerns were raised about whether or not that was kind of sufficient. The proposal is that for RBKC residents, that refund is now increased to the whole 6,000, but we maintain the 3,000 for non-resident children.
Can you say that again, Julie? I didn't understand. Sorry.
So at the moment, once you've spent 50% of your notional funding on meeting the first 6,000 of provision for anyone with an EHCP, the system currently credits you back 3,000. And head teachers were saying that even though it's a from the discussion for mainstream schools was about the clawback, about whether or not the erroneous top up was paid should be a clawback, and we discussed the impact of the recalibration, and so Appendix A shows you the sort of modelling that happened around the recalibration, and then we looked at the cash that schools actually received, and that's Appendix B, and what we recognised is that neither methodology offers schools a high degree of confidence in a clawback calculation. So the alternative proposal being put forward is a recommendation that we extend the capping on bands 8 to 10 indefinitely, because that is a more transparent and equitable way forward. So that would be the end of any kind of proposals around clawback. And then
Julie, sorry, just want to clarify, why does it need to be indefinite?
well, until we've cleared our deficit.
So until we cleared all 6 million of it?
Yes.
Yes, indefinitely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, we're saying it's going to take us a long time
Yeah.
to. The DFE use the term deficit recovery.
Yeah.
Anita and I use the term deficit management because we're not
Yeah.
sure how long it's going to take to recover this deficit. It's realistic, isn't it?
Yeah.
So realistically, the schools are still going to have to make up that gap on those.
On 8 to
Yeah,
8 to 10, we agreed at the last
I know,
meeting
I'm
to
just-
bump up the cap. Yeah.
Yeah.
But also, we always said, right from the very beginning, that if the Section F of the plan specifies a number of interventions that actually cost, I'll give you an example of if you are profoundly deaf or profoundly blind, you might need an intervener plus a number of interventions, and your actual provision will exceed that cap, and we said that would be an exception.
Gotcha.
Yeah?
Yeah.
So the clawback is replaced by a proposal for indefinite capping of 8 to 10. And then Appendix C, which accompanies the paper, is a proposal for cost of living pressures for all of the schools that host our specialist provision. And that includes Kensington Queens Mill Special School.
Is there a deadline when you can apply for that? Is that passed?
Apply for.
Apply for the additional funding for cost of living?
No, what we're suggesting is that these are actually new top-up rates that will come into force. So it's not an apply process, we will apply it.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And then just on the deficit recovery programme for the Highlands block, when do you have to update that? When's the next?
We said we'd do it in the autumn term, we'd bring back an update in the autumn.
Thank you.
Okay, all right, thanks, Julie. So it sounds like it was a very positive meeting in terms of thrashing out some of the details. I think one thing you've missed off is the securing of the DBB funding. So I think, as I don't know if people are aware that the DBB funding that Julie presented on last time, the DFE have granted that £1 million of funding, so that's great news, and well done to Julie and to Ian and the team who worked really, really hard on that. Any questions on this paper, Peter?
Well, I'm pleased to see the clawback abandoned, or is, yes, recast, let's put it that way. On 5.2, I'm also pleased to hear the limit. Two questions. Firstly, where can we find the 50% notional funding for each school? Is it available?
Yes, we sent it out with the papers. Luke circulated that.
I can resend it to you.
Can you resend it to me, please? Thank you.
And it does change each year, so we do update it every year.
Yeah, okay. I'd just like to keep in touch with it. And secondly, really a similar question to the one I asked earlier. From where does have we got a cost estimate for raising the £3,000 to £6,000, and where does it come?
So
And where does the budget come?
yeah, so so it will cost more money. So we're currently forecasting that the targeted support. I just want to check that I've got the right figure. So we're currently forecasting that targeted support cost is 286,000. That's based on the £3,000. So it won't be a full doubling of that because of the So we think it's going to be about another 150,000 of that. So what in effect it's going to do is so at the start of next year, it's going to lead to an overspend on that budget. So it will effectively be an overspend, but we're not. But we've got more of an underspend this year than we ever thought we'd have. But that. So that's why we think it's only affordable to do the in borough. Yeah. So, but we can. I think I'm happy to be more specific on what that figure is.
No, just so that we know where it's
Yeah, so there
coming
will
from.
be an overspend next year. But
When you say start of the year, you mean start of the financial year? presumably?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Just building briefly on your earlier point, obviously, as you said, Andrew, really good news that the DfE has decided, subject to assigning all the kind of grant conditions and the letters that Sarah Newman has received, the £1 million from April for delivering better value. We had a discussion at Forum last time about what we could and couldn't apply for, and also a really good discussion actually at High-Needs reference group a couple of weeks ago. Really good turnout, great to see a number of primary colleagues there. I think an ongoing plea to have a bit more secondary representation at that group. And as you said, Julian, 10.1, we'll have a more detailed discussion at the next reference group about the areas of spend that the DfE has agreed in its investments in SEN services locally. So it's good news and more to come on that.
Thank you. Any other questions on
Can I
this?
ask a naive question?
Of course, David.
How does this money actually come into the borough? And when it comes in, it goes out from point of stage. How long does it sit with you? And if it sits with you for a long period of time, do we get interest on that? How does it work?
they
Will that
made
reduce that
a need
offset
to-
income?
They made a need to forecast the spend pattern because they're going to drip the money to us, so we're not going to get a chance to put it in the bank.
It's over the year, so I should have
No, it's good.
Yeah, no, they're
The Treasury is always plays Scrooge.
I'm just thinking because the margins are actually quite small actually. When we talk about 80 million, a few couple of million there would actually, you can get that quite quickly. But, oh well.
Okay, right, thanks everyone. So should we move this on? So we go to recommendations. Just 11.1, just to note the high needs block forecasting the DfG cumulative deficit position. 11.2, can I get approval for the proposed hardship fund for reductions in moderated top up funding? With agreement on that?
Agreed.
Yeah. Okay. 11.3, approve the proposed change to the targeted funding allocations. Yeah,
Agreed.
thank you. 11.4, approve the proposals regarding the clawback and the changes there. Yeah, fantastic. 11.5, approve the proposed topics for the SRPs and special schools and local resulting amended budgets. That's in section 9. Thank you. And just 11.6, note the forward plan for the high needs block reference group in section 10. Okay, right, thanks everybody. We move on to A7 following roles, proposed allocation sums for 23-24.
So this paper runs through the proposed allocations for 23-24 for the last month. In total forum, forum agreed holding fund of 106,000 and one small club, as well as the criteria to qualify for this funding. Most of the criteria remain the same, and it's in section 1.1 of the report. The one criteria that was agreed at January forum was that schools can only receive falling roles funding for a maximum of 2 years. So if a school has received its funding for 2 years already, they won't be eligible for consideration of this fund. Appendix A shows the three schools that met the criteria for falling roles. I've been told it's not printed properly if you've got a paper pack, but the three it's really cut off. Online it's okay, but the three schools are Basfield, St Francis and Park Brunel. So they were eligible based on the new criteria. Officers reviewed the business cases, all three schools submitted their business cases. And we also examined their balances and their forecast. The main actions across all of the business cases included mainly plan restructures, reviewing form entries, building stronger relationships with admissions, increased marketing. All the business cases provided an updated financial position, but any funding agreed will be subject to the school's balances at the end of 22-23. So as long as their balances are considered excessive, I use the payment standard, which is 8% of primaries and 5% of secondaries, only then will they be eligible for that funding. Based on the latest forecast for the 3 schools, we're not expecting them to be in excess. Following a request at Forum, we arranged a thematic audit around actions taken following receipt of these funds. So Section 3.2 has a summary of the findings. Mainly, it concluded that there isn't really a common approach between schools in monitoring and implementing the actions stated in the business cases. And actually there was a lack of oversight from governing bodies. So we're still waiting for the final full report from the audit. Hopefully we'll have that in time for June Forum, where we can come back and share the full findings, along with some recommendations and better monitoring and governance going forward, hopefully.
Well, sorry, I mean, given that this forum gives money that comes from other schools to these schools to top them up, to hear that the governance around it, I find quite shocking actually. And I wonder what powers the local authority has to do anything about that.
Well, I mean, it's
So in other words, they present you with a plan, they use our money, they then don't follow up, they don't meet the plan, and can the local authority do something?
I think that's why we requested the audit to understand what was going on.
Yeah,
Because
quite.
I think what we discussed 2 meetings ago was there was a lack of scrutiny over
Yes.
what
We had
happened
no
with the money,
idea.
how it was spent, and
Yeah.
if there was following roles, was the school looking at cost savings, so it didn't result in.
But now we've had the audit and seeing governance is lacking amongst other things, so what next?
Well, I mean, I think it's a discretionary fund, isn't it? So we don't have to allocate it. But I think having had a really helpful working group discussion where some of these issues were discussed, I guess, above and beyond the audit, a discussion about how schools, and governors, and some of you are governors, what monitoring is happening at their own schools. I mean, through our governance team, and I guess also through Anita's team, we can offer that advice and support. We're talking about 3 schools here that moving forward, that, what we would expect in terms of how those actions are monitored through governance, and I guess through checking in with Anita's team that we do that. I mean, the fact we've frankly tightened the criteria, haven't we? Because we recognise, as you say, this money is de-delegated from all schools to give to a small number of schools to support them in a transition, largely due to falling roles that we would, perhaps with the findings of the audit, bring perhaps more detailed monitoring here. It's probably not the role of Forum to discuss individual schools and their plans, but quite right, and as you say, we seek assurance that the money is being spent wisely and the actions are being properly monitored.
I think previously when we looked at this, that the plans weren't being looked at 3 years ago. So what was being there wasn't anything being submitted, or what was being submitted wasn't being checked against. Was it rational? Was it going to provide a cost saving? So I think that's the change. I think there's probably further work to do
Yeah.
as we go through the financial year, but it's obviously not for us to have in papers here, but more work between officers and the school.
The payments are relatively modest as well this time, aren't they? I do have one slight amendment, and I'm not going to reopen the discussion from last meeting, but I would like to say it should, at 1.17, somewhere like that, there needs to be another one in there, criteria, that says that there's an exclusion for certain children. I'm not going to say their names, but I do think that it needs to be mentioned, because otherwise I fit that, but one school fits that criteria otherwise.
Okay, so making it clear within the criteria
That we're choosing that is in the criteria.
Absolutely.
Sorry, can you say
Yeah.
it again? I didn't quite catch that.
There are some schools that say, some schools took in a
Thank you,
bulge
Oh,
of,
that.
yes, and we're not going to go in the fact that foreign laws, they're artificially falling. So
But we need to stipulate within the criteria
that's
who
yes.
right is included and who isn't.
Yeah.
Clarity.
Other than the, okay.
Peter.
I note that Felsfield now, Brunel is a very northern part of the borough. Is there any sort of I mean, I know the problems with the north.
Bathfield.
Oh, sorry, Bowersfield. Sorry,
St Francis
I'm getting.
Lark.
Don't make assumptions here, Peter.
Sorry?
It's always the north, but
Gosh, if you
Yeah.
say to Bathfield, they're in the north.
Yeah, they'd be very.
Yes, sorry. I take it all back.
Okay, right, thanks everybody. So the recommendations, Ian, did you want to mention anything on primary executive?
Thank
I think
you.
that's the right committee.
Thank you, Andrew. Yes, we actually planned to mention it under the minutes. So when we had a really helpful heads exec discussion around funding pressures, more generally a couple of weeks ago, Andrew, you kindly gave your time as chair for to attend it. And one of the discussions we had was around falling roles, and there was a question which I think we agreed we'd bring back here to say, is there a need at the current time to bring the working group back together again? Indeed, I look at Matt, very kindly gave her time as chair of the group. Just a reminder that the working group really was set up to monitor the 3 recommendations that Forum agreed that came from ISOS a couple of years ago to take action to reduce spec capacity. The ISOS recommendation was remove 1 to 2 forms of entry. In fact, the proposal currently is 1.5 forms of entry have already been agreed to be removed. One of them removed over a year ago. Greater support for schools around financial monitoring and advice, which is in place. And thirdly, where we can maximise pupil numbers. So I think the questions come back to say, does Forum feel at the current time there's a need to reconvene the working group to monitor progress against those 3 recommendations or not? Or is it something we keep under review?
Ian, I'd gladly do it, take it on, have our lovely group. But there was, at the time I remember huge frustration in that group about, we discussed, and I ended up going round and round in circles because it was all about who ultimately would make decisions. Was it the EBB, was it Forum? Ultimately, it's the council. So the group, I don't think I'm speaking out of turn here, felt very strongly that actually the council was putting something onto us that was almost a quasi decision that wasn't ours to take, and there wasn't really a lot more.
I don't think it was necessarily the council. I think it was other head teachers to some degree through different forums asking questions and assuming that decisions would be made by this working
And
party
also it
around
felt at a point when schools was, as it were, competing for funds and bodies on the ground, felt invidious that there was this little group stuck behind.
I think my view on this, that briefly discussed with Ian, is that the working party was set up to establish what the problems were and what the solutions might be. We've ran through the recommendations that ISOS on group suggested. I think to convene another group would just be potential meddling with schools. And it would be, as you said, Emily, I think some heads would just assume that they were the decision-making body for the council. That could be unhelpful. I think it needs to just rely on officers working with individual heads and governing bodies, and also working through the head teachers, consultatives, executives, etc.
I think if you recall, one of the overarching recommendations from ISOS was that there should be a school-led approach, which is very much what we appreciate your point on what we tried to take forward with the working group. But I'm bringing that point. So obviously, some colleagues here were at heads exec when they said, let's just have this brief conversation at Forum.
The other issue, Ian, was because there was this perception that the working group was making decisions, the group got bigger and bigger and bigger.
Sure.
More people piling in. We ended up with almost this meeting called the working
I
group.
appreciate
Unwieldy,
It was ridiculous.
I think it would. One of the feelings from the group and beyond is that we would like decisions to be made so that we can have stability in our school population. And one of the things that we're often told is about the fact that our role is much stronger than our neighbouring boroughs, and that's great. But in the north of the borough, sometimes it is tough, and the vacancy level means that parents are choosing to move school to school, and I know what that feels like when that happens, and it impacts on children in the long term. And so I think there is a feeling that we would like local authority to make decisions with the diocese, but at the same time, we realise, all of us, that those things are always hard.
Chair, I agree with Amanda's comments as she set out. I'd also add that I, for one, found the whole process very, shall we say, it caused a lot of anxiety at Avondale amongst the governors and the then head teacher, who's since retired. I think that it is initially for the officers to do a short paper detailing what's happening, and if there's a problem, then we can decide how to try and approach it. But I do agree with Amanda that we were sort of assumed to have decision-making capabilities, and in fact the decision-making was much more diffuse, we found, at the end of it. You know, you've got the Educational Partnership Board and, you know, political input and whatever. So I'm not saying Amanda very competently chaired it. I'm not saying it wasn't worthwhile doing it, but I just think we should think, if we've got to do it again, that there may be a better way or a better structure.
I think we received those papers anyway at the last meeting when Wendy brought the pupil place planning projections. I think it's just us monitoring those projections and then from them recommendations around where we might need to relook at in terms of numbers and pupil places.
And also there was some good news in that as well, wasn't there, around reception applications, and actually those really do buck the trend, and there's signs of people moving back to London at the moment, and you really feel it.
Those numbers appear to be stabilising. I think exactly as Andrew says, every year. Sorry, let's look at those. Let's look at those projections, but they do currently appear to be stabilising. But you know, the key area, I suppose, for Forum is: are there any schools at risk of going to deficit? Are they getting the right support at the right time from Richard's team, colleagues such as Hilary, and from Anita's team? And is there an issue there that we need to look at Forum? And that's we've got slight increase in number of schools projected to be in deficit, but it's something we want to keep on the review, I think, at this current time.
David.
I think sometimes in order to fully grasp where we're at in the here and now, it's quite useful to just go back. It does help to afford some context. I think there were a lot of really positives about that working group. I agree with your comment. I think it was quite hard. The biggest problem with it was it was unruly, and there were some people coming along to those meetings with their own agenda. And they weren't being pragmatic, they weren't looking at what's in the best interest of the school that had the biggest challenges and so on going forward. So I think we have to learn from that. But I think the other thing that got in the way is really wasn't helpful was the white paper. So I think there wasn't this level of tension and anxiety and unrest until there was all that talk about white paper. So it's really welcome. I think it was at the last forum where you said something like, that ship's gone, that's moved on, and I know that some of the central issues arising from the white paper haven't disappeared at the moment. But who knows where we might be in 18 months' time. Different government, different agenda, who knows. But in terms of us returning, trying to kind of revisit and redo, I do agree. I don't think we should be doing that. And I think there isn't an appetite actually necessary amongst the heads. I think some of the heads who came along to the exec and they spoke about that, there definitely is more of an appetite to see something from councillors and from the staff. And I do fully acknowledge and recognise what I sort of said about the driving needs to be governors in communicating with the director. I do understand that. I think what has also been said this evening, I really do agree with, and that's a sense of equilibrium being established through better communication to schools. I think schools just need to be clear about, once again, and I know you wrote to schools, I think it was about 9 months ago, to say as such that the decision ultimately is with the governing boards, but that is all through the communication. Richard described recently the paper that went to all governors, as far as I'm aware, and was very clear about the mechanisms in place. But I just think perhaps this needs to be done this again, but perhaps in summary, to lay out the councils, but also use the rector of North Store in terms of the direction of travel, forgive that awful phrase, but it will do for tonight, in terms of what the immediate future might look like. But there is anxiety there, there's no doubt. I mean, the last consultative was painful, listening to a larger than norm, the norm group of heads running schools for the world, and there is uncertainty. I'm not going to pretend otherwise.
Okay, right, well, it sounds like we're in agreement on what direction travel is on a working group. Thank you, David. So if we return back to item A7, just in terms of the recommendations. So 4.1.1, allocate following roles funds to schools meeting the qualification of attendance A at £106,000. And note that funding will be called back should the schools by the end of 22-23 because of in excess of by the ESFA. Okay, thank you. Note the thematic audit findings. The full findings will be reported to the Human Schools Forum, and just the point that Jack did maybe on just clarity around which schools are included in that. Okay, item 8, any other business?
Sorry, just I overheard what you're saying. It's not which schools, but which students.
Clarity around which students, yeah. Sorry. Thank you. Any other business?
Can I raise one thing very quickly, which is, I should have actually raised it under the high needs paper, but it is hopefully most of you know about it anyway, it is a little bit of good news that so for the non-teaching staff, it's not academies, but it's maintained schools, the pension contribution to the local government pension scheme is reduced for 2 years, going down from 16.1% to 7.5% for 2 years. That actually does make, because it's been reviewed in terms of how much money is in the pension scheme, and that the view is that the contribution can be reduced and it will still stay within balance in terms of what the requirements are. So this is a council-wide decision, but obviously impacts on non-teaching staff in.
Good news is in there, though, it remains at 15% in year 3 as well.
Yes, so for the third year, yes, goes back to 15. Yeah.
Why does that not apply with
Teachers are on a national teachers pension scheme, so we don't control. Yeah, just the
It exists for all non-teaching staff.
if they're in the local government pension scheme, it's different for academies. I think theirs is set nationally, and I think theirs stays at 15.
Ours has gone down, but only by 1%,
Yeah,
from 16.1 to 15.3.
Yeah.
So the numbers are 16 to 17.5. Sorry, 7.5 for this.
Yes.
Yeah. Thank you.
It's £90,000 saving.
Yeah. Yes, it does make.
Yes, it does make it's not a difference. Yeah.
And that is good news. Okay. Thanks everybody. Nice to see you.